Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show is about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Soulmates. A great episode, a lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. I liked how this story was told because it's so different I figured as much, but I think it's so interesting because obviously we do have this whole soulmate situation being the overarching thing, but it is a very different episode from last week's episode because it starts off a little bit because I'm like, okay, you can already tell a little bit of difference because he's already married and his soulmate finds him because obviously he's a professor. You also find out his boss doesn't like him. Then you find out later on, the reason why his boss doesn't like him because his boss is his father-in-law, so that's a whole complicated thing in itself. But basically, he meets, David meets Allison, which, side note, David, that actor, I've seen him in a multitude of things, Suits. I've never seen the show, but I'm pretty sure I remember seeing that he's in Billions as well. But you've seen that actor pop up and stuff from time to time. But nevertheless, he meets Allison, and she's like, he's like, my profile was private. How'd you access it? She's like, I went a little illegal about it, but, what I did was wrong. But, it's just like, I needed to find my soulmate. She kind of felt like, she loved her husband, but it's like a thing of she just felt like almost like something was missing. But he's like, I love my wife, so no. But she's like, here's my information. Maybe we could end up being friends or something. And so in the beginning, I'm like, oh, this is complicated because it's like, oh, man. Because at least in the other situation, it's a thing of that kind of trickled down later on and more and more as the episode went down. But it's like, this case, it's kind of, we're starting at the beginning with the whole soulmates thing, and now it's this thing of we get a little entrance into his life. He loves his wife, but the fact of the matter is he's never good enough. It's like, your dad hates me. It's like, no, he doesn't hate you. He just doesn't think you're good enough for me. And obviously, it seems like the family probably doesn't like him because it's like they're celebrating Walter's birthday, and he's up there making a toast, and he's making a joke about him being a terrible boss. No one laughs, and you're just kind of like, you feel bad for the bastard. But then it's the thing of him and Allison eventually meet up again, and she's like, I'm sorry, it's just, it ends up being a thing of he's like, I love my wife, I don't want this to jeopardize our marriage. So it's a complicated thing. You're like, come on, don't do it. Be a good, upstanding guy. I know the irony behind that thought process early in the episode, because I love how they twisted on you, but you're you kind of feel bad for him at first. I won't lie to you, that scene with them and when they met up, and they kissed for the first time, it was kind of she's like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. My main thought was, oh my God, you're being set up. My thought was Walter wants to ruin your relationship with his daughter, so he hired someone, because it's how she hacked into the soulmates thing. It's it had to be because she had someone powerful backing her or something so. That's why I was thinking maybe because obviously she comes from money. Her his wife Sarah's family comes from money, because he thinks that's why she's marrying it. Because obviously I even love that line from him being I'm about to retire and you're going to get tenure. He's like, everyone's going to think that you're getting tenure because you're married to my daughter. And he's like, and I want you to know that's exactly the reason why. I was like, dude, as I heard someone say earlier today, that was a dick slap. That was oh man, you're okay, sure. Oh, that was just man, he just egg all over your face. You're just man, that was a dick move. Granted, in the grand scheme of things, it's just, like I said, I like how the episode kind of, he starts thinking about it more and more. She's texting him, and it spirals a little bit. And, it's just kind of they end up, having a little bit of a date. And then, when they're talking and stuff like that, the moment she mentions, I had, there was someone that was important to me. She was the only, because obviously the whole conversation about love, he talks about the fact is he never really had love. And then when he was close to 40, he was like, yeah, I in his position, that's the reason why he signed up, for that, site and everything, because he wanted to find love, because, in his field, you can't really find people your own age. And so he was like, I've never been in love before. And she's like, you've never really been in love? She's like, I have. And it's for her, it's the one person, it's went off and married a professor. My immediate thought was, and he's like, oh, she, professor. I'm like, is it going to be a twist where it's because at first I was are we going to find out Sarah's the she or something like that? Because I didn't understand, but it didn't seem like Sarah and him met through work. I mean, but it was I was confused. I was that seemed is she trying to get back at you for stealing her love from her? And technically that was right, but it still didn't turn out the way I thought it would. Like I said, just every time you think you got something figured out and the episode kind of turns, like even like I said, I got pieces of it. I was right that he was set up, that this had to do something with that she, that this wasn't all copacetic, but it's like they go back to the hotel and they do their thing and he wakes up and she's going, I'm like, oh boy, he's about to get dropped on you, about to get dropped by the hammer. Because I was still thinking like, oh, his father-in-law set this whole thing up, but then he's at work and then there's a picture of his penis on like the slide and stuff like that. I was like, what the fuck is that about? And it's like, I was like, oh, what? And then Allison's not really responding, and he calls her up, and she's just kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, like I couldn't. She's like, oh, wait for me at the hotel room again. He does, stays there all day. Lo and behold, the moment someone enters, I was like, that's his student, Hannah. I'm sure it's her. Turns out it is her. I was like, what kind of game is this? And she's like, but you sent me those pictures, and he was like, what pictures? I was like, you were getting set up hard. I was like, why is she going this hard after you? Because part of me was almost thinking like, are you getting the wrong person or something? But it's like, no, she's going after him super hard. And I'm like, holy shit, dude. And now his entire life is being threatened, and he's trying to figure out like why she's doing this. And it's like, because of what basically is hinting to some stuff that he's done in the past. And it's like, what, it's like, she's like, I'm doing this for love, basically threatening to turn his life upside down. But then we find out later on what that whole situation is, that basically when he was at Berkeley or whatever, there was accusations against him from a student that he's like, they were false. I was like, wait, were they? But then he was so adamant about like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. So part of me was almost like, did she get the wrong person? Because at this point, there's a movie. This movie's like from a couple years ago. I want to say it was like from the early 2000s, early to mid 2000s. It was I want to say it was, I think the movie's called Hard Candy. It's kind of a similar thing. Basically, Ellen Page is getting revenge against this dude. It's like a pedophile or something. It's a movie. I want to say it's from like 2004. I could be mistaken. I watched it years ago, and I've seen. I don't think I even saw the movie all the way through, because there's certain parts you're like, And I think especially because I was young at the time, I couldn't really process a lot. But it's that thing of like her being adamant about him being guilty, him denying, being like adamant about his, and that's why I was wondering, I was like, is he guilty? And in this particular case, I'm like, is David guilty? Is he not? He's clear about, his father-in-law was asking, is there anything else? And he's like, no, because Allison's like, you have to tell your wife the truth. And if you tell her the truth, I'll delete all those pictures. I'll delete all the incriminating evidence, so it's like, and it's like, I'll report you. It's like, oh, who you going to report on? Allison Jones? That's not her real name, And then, because I can't remember if that was before or after. I think, no, this was like well after the fact that he shows up at his place and she's there. Allison's waiting for him and she's talking to his wife and stuff. It's like, oh my God, your wife is great. And she even said something where it's like, oh, you might not want to hold on too tight. You'll leave a mark. I was like, dude, like, because at that point I was still like wondering, like, is she got the wrong person? What's going on? And like I said, I like that they flipped the script, because obviously it's like, this is your protagonist, this is your hero. Not necessarily a hero in this, but it's just like, this is the main character you're following, and you find out, oh, this main character's a piece of shit. But at first you're still kind of wondering, like, maybe he's not. Maybe she got it wrong. Maybe because we end up finding out her real name is Jody. This all has to do with her sister who ended up killing herself. You figured as much when he was like, yeah, your situation looks even worse because of what happened to the girl. It's like, she killed herself, so there was accusations against you, and the woman who put accusations against you ended up dying. I shouldn't even say woman, because she was a college student, so she wasn't like a full-grown woman yet, which makes that situation even worse. But it's like, she killed herself, so it's like, now you find out that's what Jody's been doing. Like, this is what this is all about. This is her, because he ended up going deep on it, trying to remember, like, he's like, this has to do with Chloe. So he looks into it and he looks at her funeral and it sees a picture and it's like, oh, it's a picture of Jody, her sister. And it's like, but he remembers exactly what she said. It's like, oh, this woman, she was, we did everything together. And it's like, her sister, the one person in the world she loved more than anything. And it's like, you're kind of responsible for taking her away. And it's like, yeah, and then the whole, like I said, did it finally register to him, oh, the person you were in love with found a professor, how that story goes, is as she said, and it's like, it starts making sense to him. But he ends up tracking Jody down, and he's like, oh, you should have, like, not, you should have paid with cash or whatever, because he was able to trace where she was. And then, like I said, I thought what's interesting is that scene changes. Like, you were already kind of like, maybe he's not the piece. Maybe just, Jody's grief stricken, and she's just lashing out, but he's not the bad guy. And it's like, oh no, he's definitely the bad guy, the piece of shit, the way he's getting on top. I'm like, okay, if you calmly were like, you got this wrong, I'm not the person you think I am, but the way he burst into a room and everything, on top of that, then getting on top of her, you're like, oh, you're guilty as sin. And then he even admits it. He's like, oh no, I did love her, which is so interesting because remember early in the episode, that's why she was like, oh, you didn't love anyone. Kind of shows her, it's like, oh, you never... See, because you want to say now in this moment that I'm confronting you that you loved my sister, but you said earlier you've never really loved anyone before, making me feel even more so, because she already felt like you were pulling my sister's heartstrings. You manipulated her, said all the right things, and then you you said all this stuff because he was even telling his father-in-law, what does he say? Like, oh, she was mentally unstable, delusions and stuff like that, and then he's now saying like, oh, we had a relationship, I broke it off, and she spiraled, and it's like, but then it's the thing of like, obviously he looks at her phone and it's like, oh, you were never going to delete these pictures, and what we're going to do is that she was going to send it to the board so he'd lose tenure, so basically everyone, including his wife, would know the truth about who he really is. And so for him, and then once again he takes it a step further to make you realize how much of a piece of shit he is. He's like, if you don't stop, you won't coming after me, I'm going to come after your wife and your child. You're like, yo, you are the biggest piece of shit. So that's why I'm like, the episode flips on it, because you feel bad for him, because like, oh my God, he's in this complicated relationship. Like I said, it's a completely different vibe and feel from the previous episode. But the fact, because that was like a complicated, dramatic love story. This is just kind of like a dark tale of revenge and try to get justice for somebody, and I thought that was such just interesting. Like, obviously they're probably going to be playing with this aspect of things. Like, I kind of figured, like, don't expect every story to kind of have the same flow, and I just didn't expect like a complete like 90 degree 180 90 degree turn, 180 whatever degrees, like a crazy turn like this, and I thought that was so interesting, and very interesting storytelling, because it turned, because I guess she's determined enough, and she's probably, we never really dive into it too much. How I'm assuming she just figured it out herself. Like, either she hired the right people or she did it herself. Like the whole acting, they never really go into that because it's not important. She got the information she got, So I just thought that was so interesting, and like, it's like, I was like, man, there's not much time left in this episode. I'm like, and the episode, like, it cuts to black there. I was like, what's going to happen here? And it's like 11 minutes later, he's in front of the class teaching again. It's like, oh my God, I got tenure and stuff like that. And then lo and behold, he's like, haha. And then it turns out she had a camera ready, so that means she was expecting, like, that's the reason why she left. Like, she made it easy for him to find her, because she knew and that's so interesting that she thinks that far ahead. She knew that he'd try and confront her to scare her to get, release everything. So she was able to get the recording of that. She had set that up ahead of time, knowing exactly how he would behave and act. I guess because she looked at the situation and he's kind of a creature of habit. So, because even for her, she even admitted, like, she was going to get Hannah to file, a complaint against him, because he wanted to save Hannah, because Hannah was potentially in the same route, because you saw earlier on Hannah kind of flirting a little bit with David. And he was like, because obviously she's like, oh, look at that couple down there. Aren't they a little bit cliche? And he's like, oh, here you are hitting on teacher. Aren't you isn't that a little cliche? So it's there, because even like his father-in-law walked in almost like, the fuck was that? Like, you in here with your student alone? Like, it seems a little suspicious. So it was already there. The writing was on the wall. It took literally the wall being destroyed for you to be like, oh, so this is what's going on. That's such a weird metaphor to use. I'm sure. I'm stupid. Sorry. But I just thought that was so interesting for her to expose him like that. And literally everyone's phones are blaring, and he's like, class is over, blah, 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 blah. His wife is hitting him up about what he did and everything. So now his entire life, his tenure, his marriage, him as just a teacher in general, his name is forever tarnished. Rightfully so for what he did. Because once again, like I said, you start off feeling bad for him. You're thinking, like, oh man, he's in a tough spot. And now you realize, like, he got what he deserved. And the look on Jody's face, like, yes, I won, I did it. because for her, it's like, yes, I got justice for my sister, but then you see the smile disappear because regardless of everything, like even exposing him for what he is, it doesn't matter because it doesn't bring her sister back. It's like no matter how much revenge, I wouldn't really even call it, whether you want to call it revenge, I look at it more as her going, very vigilante style justice. But it's like, it's even exposing him for who he is, it won't bring her sister back, so it's that moment of like, I got justice for you, Chloe, but you're still gone. That heartache she has is still going to be there regardless. It alleviated it a little bit, but it still doesn't take away that pain. So I just thought this was such an interesting episode. Like I said, making the protagonist the focus of the story, making him actually a piece of shit human being, and I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Because you can make some argument maybe things didn't go the way he wanted, but it's still kind of like you abused your power, and then also you said all this shit to make her seem crazy, and it's like, it's not like you took any responsibility for what happened, it's like you moved on with your life, because even with the way you talked to Jody, you made it sound like she didn't matter to you when you're like, oh, I've never been, so, that just like solidified it in her mind, like, probably even more so like, oh, I'm on the right path to doing what I need to do, so. Like I said, it was a great episode. I thought that was just, like I said, that turn was such an interesting twist I didn't necessarily see coming. Like I said, I was waiting for the twist, and like I said, I got bits of it, but I didn't get the full story right. But I just thought that was so interesting. So I'm really interested to see where the rest of the episodes takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.